Here I come, swooping in to do my review. It's Cannon Hawk. Caw-caw, caw-caw. Oh God, that was terrible. Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The Inner Fight, which is Star Trek Lower Decks Season 4, Episode 9, the penultimate episode of Season 4. I'll have to start with the spoiler warning for Lower Decks. If you haven't seen up to Season 4, Episode 9, you will not want to watch this video. Otherwise, some things will be spoiled for you. So, I don't know. I have to get this review out like as soon as possible, but I'm still kind of unsure of how I feel about this episode. I overall would say I'm positive towards this episode. I did like it. But let me first address my little intro thingy about the Cannon Hawk thing, because that's mainly what I've been consumed about, which is, some people might take issue with it or call silly because Lower Decks is, it is canon. It is, by all official accounts, but it's always loose. Plays fast and loose with being canon because it's a comedy show. But this episode wasn't so much a comedy. I guess there were a few funny bits, but I think the funny bits in this episode would be comparable to funny bits in a normal Star Trek episode. Not every Star Trek episode has humor infused in it, but a lot of them do. Even some of the serious episodes. And I think that's more comparable to this. It wasn't like a straight out silly, ridiculous comedy like some of the episodes of Lower Decks have been. But yeah, and to be clear, I'm not just thinking of the canon of, the entire franchise or the episodes or moments referenced in this episode, but specifically Lower Decks. That's what I'm sort of caught up on. So let me get to my first, Cannon Hawk issue, and that is, when this episode says, and this is something I brought up in last week's episode too, I did have a sort of Cannon Hawk sort of thingy about the fact that they said, oh, we've never been on the mission for a long time, and I'm like, but you have. You guys, the four of you have been hanging out the whole time. And so along those same lines, this week we get Mariner, who's acting very suicidal and doing crazy things. We get the whole intro with the weird scientists studying those totally acid things. I did think that was kind of funny where the scientists, oh, these things are so majestic and beautiful and I love them. Oh, the fence is down. Oh my God, they're gonna kill us. Screw those things. And then one just happened to pop out of Mariner's shirt. How did it pop out of Mariner's shirt without killing her if they're that dangerous? And I don't know, I just had a bad reaction to them saying that, oh, he was right about the eyes, implying that his eyes were popping out. That seemed a bit callous to treat a character that. But anyway, that's beside the point. The point is, the character trait that was established is that Mariner's being suicidal and reckless and trying to go on dangerous missions. And Captain Freeman specifically referenced that this has been occurring, or maybe it was some of the Lower Deckers, I don't know, but someone referenced that this had been occurring since her mission to Ferenginar. That was back in episode 6. Parth Ferengi used something hard or whatever. And so I thought about there was been a couple episodes in between that episode, and was Mariner acting particularly reckless and suicidal? No. I look back at those two episodes, there was a few badges more, which an argument could be made because she ran out of the ship and followed Rutherford over on this dangerous mission. So an argument could be made that she was being a bit reckless. But once she was there, she was like, "What's the plan?" And Rutherford said, "Oh, I was just gonna let myself die." And the Mariner was like, "Well, I hate that plan." Now, granted, being reckless doesn't necessarily mean she just wants to forfeit. It means she wants to go out fighting. So, an argument again could be made that that's still within her character. But I would say the rest of the episode, she doesn't do anything. She could have done something really reckless to sort of endanger them in the situation they were in with Badgie, who was freaking insane. But she mostly just stood by and let Rutherford take the reins, which is not in character if we're saying that she's being... because in this episode in particular, she would jump ahead and like disregard what other people say and take lead, take command, and do something crazy that would set the villain off. And she could have easily done that with Badgie in that episode if this was consistent with this episode. In the episode after that is Caves, in which, again, she's not... This one, I think, is even a stronger case for this not fitting in with her being reckless and out of character. She doesn't really do anything reckless or something that would put her life in danger. In fact, she's just bickering with the other lower deckers about how they're not... telling her things about themselves and keeping secrets. And when she, comes up with the idea to use her communicator to boost whatever, like there's nothing reckless about that. So that's where I'm stuck. And again, sorry, I won't do that again. But call me ridiculous. And sure, it's just a fucking cartoon, Mark. Stop taking it so seriously. I can see the response, and there is some validity in that response. But, I don't know, it's kind of my job as a Star Trek reviewer I feel anyway, to nitpick stuff like this. And that's what I feel like this is a inherent flaw, an inherent plot hole with this episode that wants us to believe that she's been... so in other words, it's tell not show instead of show not tell. They're telling us that Mariner has been reckless and suicidal ever since the Ferengi mission, but what we saw on the screen contradicts that. So I would argue it's beyond just simple nerdy nitpicking, and it gets into inherent writing flaws. But, I'm not going to do the Hawk thing again, but that's just me. Now, the other Hawk thing, of course, really comes into account when we get to Mariner telling her backstory of why she has been so upset. And this one I'm a bit more mixed about. I think, but it had me thinking, like it had me doing a lot of research and looking things up, and specifically looking at the timeline to see how the timeline shapes out. And again, you could call me a silly nerd or whatever, and you wouldn't be wrong by saying that, but that was just my reaction to it. So she says that that's mainly her attitude of not wanting to get promoted into being defiant and wanting to stay in Ensign forever has a lot to do with her friend in Starfleet dying in the mission. So she went to Starfleet Academy. She had a friend. That person went on to become a crew member of the Enterprise, the most sort of prestigious, coveted ship. And but then she went on a spy mission where she died, and then Mariner that sort of disenfranchised her because she was meant to. They were going to Starfleet to be scientists, explorers, to explore the galaxy, not to be spies and to die. And then that further got compounded with her involvement in the Dominion War, which was a bit traumatizing for her because, again, they weren't supposed to be soldiers fighting a war. They were supposed to be explorers exploring space. And I think that's a really good storyline. I think that actually strengthens and sort of explains Mariner's behavior, but does it pass the Cannon Hawk Sniff test. I think, does it pass the sniff test is a different question. So that's the first question. Does it pass the sniff test? Does it smell off? And I think it does pass the sniff test. And first glance, like, that it doesn't, I think, directly contradict anything set up in Lower Decks or in Next Gen with Cedo, by the way, which is the name of the character. And of course, we find out Nicholas Ricardo, who Cedo was a part of the same flight team, that Mariner knew him as well. So I guess, Wesley Crusher was part of that flight team, so I suppose she knew him as well. But anyway, so that passes the sniff test. Like, I'll make the comparison to Deep Space Nine, where the episode was called Dr. Bashir, I presume, where they revealed that Dr. Bashir was genetically enhanced since birth. That did not pass the sniff test. That's like, no way. That's and of course they came up with a convenient excuse to be like, oh, he was just pretending not to be genetically enhanced the whole time. But that sound off, and upon further research, you can go back and see a lot of specific examples where that explanation does not work, where specifically you can tell that it was retcon. Now, again, I did a whole video about retcons, and retcons aren't always bad things. Sometimes they can be a really good thing, and sometimes it's kind of neutral. Sometimes, like, you can tell it was retcon, but what they're ultimately doing improves the story, so you're willing to go with it, or at least I'm willing to go with it and ignore the contradiction because it makes the story better. The thing with... And when I did a video about retcons, I counted down the top 10 worst retcons in Star Trek, and I believe the Bashir thing was my number one. I think this is one of the worst retcons. I think it's lazy writing because they just couldn't figure out to do anything interesting with Bashir's character, so let's just make him genetically engineered, just even though it completely contradicts everything that's been established in the show so far. So that is, for me, the prime example of a terrible retcon. That does not, and it did not pass the sniff test, but when you did further research, you realize that it's even worse. But with this one, it does pass the sniff test, but it remains to be seen how it will stand up upon further research. Like, if I go back and watch Lower Decks in the earlier seasons, will I find specific contradictions? Now, even if I do, it could still fall in that category that I just mentioned, that yes, it's a retcon, but it improves the story, or it makes sense for the character and makes things better, so I'm willing to overlook it. But it still has that slight annoyance of the fact that they retcon. But I don't know if that would be the case. I would have to wait till I rewatch Lower Decks and see if this matches up. As far as the TNG side of thing, I don't think it definitely doesn't contradict anything. But I'm not sure if this was... Is it a real, good explanation of why Mariner's been, so hating promotions this whole time? I mean, it could be. I think it could work. As I say, I think it passes the sniff test. But the larger question this had me thinking of is, how old is Mariner? And I tried to look this up, and I couldn't find a definitive answer to, so I guess the answer is never answered in the show itself. And so I wanted to look up the specific years that the episode First Duty took place, and the episode that Lower Decks took place, and when this episode takes place. And from what I could find on all the wiki sites is that First Duty took place in 2368. This episode takes place in 2381, I believe. It was 2381. And so if we be fair and we assume Mariner was in her freshman year, that she just started Starfleet Academy in 2368, then she would have been 18 at the time, which in 20, hold on, carry the one. Sorry. Okay, so I think that, if I'm not too mistaken, that if Mariner was 18 in 2368, then in 2381 she would be 31. And that actually, that tracks. I buy that she's 31, because at first, when I was a bit, hey, does that line up? I thought maybe it would put her in her 40s, and if it put her in her 40s, then I wouldn't be able to buy it. But 31, I can buy, because they did establish in the earlier Lower Decks that she's been an ensign forever. That she's first served on 5 different ships before going on the Cerritos, and that she has this long history that we saw in the earlier episodes of all these people would know her, and she seemed like a Mary Sue in that one episode because she had so much experience, and yet she's still an ensign. It's because she keeps demoting herself, and they reference this several times. So it is believable that she has been an ensign for... Well, actually, she's lieutenant junior grade now. So it would be roughly 8 years that she was an ensign the whole time. Mind you, she got promoted and then demoted again several times. And so she was ensign off and on for about 8 years. And that tracks. I think that totally fits with how she's been established in the show. And that would mean that she is almost a decade older than Boimler, and that I would also buy. Like, that also seems to track with everything that's been established in the show. So that part of it actually fits after investigating it. So I was a bit iffy about that at first, because Nick Locarno, I guess he would be several years older than Mariner, but he would also be in his 30s. And the way they showed him at the end of the episode looked like he was much older, but really he should just be in his 30s as well. Anyway, oh God, again, I told you this is very nerdy things that was coming to my mind. Now, let me talk about Sito, because, alright, so let me backtrack a bit. I read an article a couple weeks ago where interviewing Mike McMahon, he was talking about the finale, and they said that, or the final 2 episodes, and saying that they were going to reference a very specific episode and almost considered a sequel to that episode. And of course he didn't say what episode it was, and this could be anything from, TNG, TOS, DS9, Voyager, Enterprise. I think he did specify it would be in that era, not like the modern Trek era. So it's kind of racking my brain trying to think of, well, what episodes could he possibly, make a sequel to. And one of the first things that came to mind was like, well, the show is called Lower Decks, so maybe it is a sequel to the episode Lower Decks. And I wasn't that far off, actually, because that is one of the episodes they reference, although I think First Duty would probably be more accurate to say that was the direct sequel to, because it follows off of what Nicholas Locarno got up to. But with Mariner's backstory, that specifically references the episode of Lower Decks. And I think when I was thinking of Lower Decks, I was like, well, how could they possibly make a sequel out of that? Could they reference Sito in some way? No, that doesn't make any sense. And I dismissed it. But it turns out I shouldn't have dismissed it. So I didn't even consider the fact that Mariner would have known Sito at Starfleet Academy. Like, that thought never went anywhere near my mind. As I said, when they mentioned in the episode, I'm like, really? Does that timeline add up? But as I said, after I looked it up, the timeline in fact does add up. So it is all good. But yeah, it's interesting, Sito, because that's one of my favorite episodes, TNG Lower Decks, and because of the death of Sito, which I thought was really powerful. But one thing I wanted to mention is that during my research for other episodes, and specifically Deep Space Nine, when they had the episode Hard Time, where O'Brien goes to the Gamma Quadrant and it has the memories implanted of him being in prison for over 20 years and killing his cellmate or whatever. I talked about how the original idea of that episode was actually bringing back Cedo and showing that she's still alive, but that she was being held in a Cardassian labor camp or prison the whole time, and she finally gets out in this episode of Deep Space Nine, but she's experiencing PTSD, and they have to treat her for that. And this is something I talked about in my review for Hard Time, and I still very strongly believe this, that original premise was much better, and they should have went with that instead of the O'Brien thing. And one of the reasons for dismissing that idea, there was a couple reasons. One is that they thought it might undercut the ending of the episode Lower Decks where she died. And I think that is a legitimate excuse, and I think a lot of people would feel that way. I would not be one of them. I would not feel that way. I think it would be a great follow-up. But I can understand the perspective that a lot of people may have, that it kind of undercuts that powerful ending. The other reasoning they had is something I completely disagree with, is that it has to be a main character now. That they don't want to focus on the guest star. Let's focus on the main character. And here's my reasoning of why the opposite's actually true, why this episode would have made a lot more sense. It would have worked a lot better had they focused on the guest star and not a main character, is because it deals with PTSD and trauma. And the whole entire point of that episode was that a trauma one experiences and the PTSD one experiences is a very lasting lifetime thing. It doesn't simply go away like that, and it's haunting, it's hard to get rid of, and it's something that will be with you for the rest of your lives. And that's the whole point of the episode, and so the episode is so entirely undercuts its own message by the fact that O'Brien's instantly cured by the next episode. And that's why I don't like that episode that much. I think that I know a lot of TNG and DS9 and Voyager are episodic, and a lot of times I'm fine with it being episodic, but this is, to me, one of the most egregious examples of how being episodic specifically undercuts the message that they were trying to say. And so had they had a guest star, i.e. Cedo, they could have done that, because they could have had that message about how powerful PTSD and how it doesn't just go away. And it wouldn't just go away, because you wouldn't see that guest star again, presumably, maybe never, maybe a long time from now. And so they could absolutely play it off that way, but having a main character be where he's perfectly fine and the next episode completely undermines everything that episode's trying to do. Anyway, off topic now, but I did think about that when they brought up Cedo. In fact, while I was watching this episode, in fact, I think it's still a possibility for season 2, for episode 2, for part 2, but I seriously doubt it. But I was wondering, are they going to do that storyline now? Because I think there's examples of Lower Decks picking up abandoned storylines of... actually, no, I'm thinking of Prodigy picked up an abandoned storyline. The one where the crew goes to a planet that's idolizing the original series crew, and they act like them. Like, that was a story that was floated throughout TNG and DS9. And Prodigy finally picked it up and did it. But I think there might be other examples. So I was wondering if maybe this would be another time where Lower Decks would pick up that abandoned storyline and bring Cedo back. But I don't... The more I thought about it, and as the episode went on, and certainly once I saw the whole episode, I don't think that would work. I don't think that would fit. And I do think that would serve us to undermine not only the episode Lower Decks, but the storyline that they just created with Mariner being so affected by Cedo's death. Although finding out she was still alive might completely blow her whole mindscape and change her perspective and the way she sees the world. But I don't know. I still hope they don't... I don't know. I mean, maybe they could pull that off, but I don't see how. I feel like that wouldn't be a good storyline. A good way to go is to bring Cedo back to life. I think they would have. I still think they should have done that in Hard Time. I still think that would have been a way better episode. But that time is past. That's not doable, and I don't think it would work as well in here. But yeah. Anyway, So I spent all this time talking about Kanan. What about the episode itself? This is where, I don't know. I guess for the most part, I was just having a hard time looking past, like, through while I was watching most of this episode. And again, maybe if I watch it a second or third time, I might think differently, but I don't have time to do that right now. I gotta get this review out. So, but as I was watching it, I was just couldn't get past the fact that this behavior that Mariner was doing was inconsistent with the last two episodes, and that all of a sudden she's being suicidal. But if I ignore that, if I try to ignore that, I think it works, especially with the revelation of why she with her Cedo or whatever, and why she's so against being promoted, and why this is like bothering her to her core. I do think that works a lot, and also it might help to explain everything that was going on with her up to this point. Now, with I love some of the scenes in this episode, particularly when they had the Klingon guy. They brought him back, and the scenes with him and Mariner I thought were brilliant. Starting with them fighting, and then eventually going in the cave, and they're like, it's too close combat to battle in here, we will have to wait till the rain stops. But they end up talking and getting along, and I like how she ends up hugging him. It's like, what are you doing? Klingons do not hug. Like, that was great. I loved all of that. And also how, him talking to her, like, made her realize, what she was doing, was, why she was doing it, and what she was doing was off. Despite the fact that I feel like we already got the scene in episode 2 of this season when Ransom and her had it out, and Ransom made her realize why she was doing it and it was off, but then she goes right back to being self-destructive. But whatever. I'm willing to go with that. That's fine. Maybe I could buy that talk with Ransom didn't completely solve everything, and she still had deep-seated issues, so I'll buy that. But it still feels like when I saw the episode, so we resolved the storyline, and then we go back into it in episode 6, they're like, so it's not resolved, and now they're continuing it. But whatever, they want to keep it up that way, I'll go with it, fine. But anyway, so that was cool. I really like that. I think the aspect of having all these different aliens being trapped on this planet is a good answer, by the way. I haven't even addressed the fact that this episode answers the question of what was going on with that weird ship transporting people. And of course, we find out at the end of the episode who, in fact, is controlling that weird ship. That was really cool. And yeah, the answer of having all these different aliens, and I still am not comfortable with the fact that Tendi is seen as this royal figure and all Orions bow to her as soon as they see her. I don't like that element of the show, but it's in canon. I'm the canon Hulk now, so I gotta admit this is part of canon now. I just don't like it, and I don't think they should have done it. But they did, so it has to be consistent. And of course we get the Bynars there. I like the Bynars. Actually, when I was looking up, I looked up, for research for this episode, I looked up Mariner's Memory Alpha page, and I had forgotten she had mentioned she had dated a Bynar once. And that's interesting. Anyway, so that, and I like that, and I like how the Klingon sort of made friends with Mariner and was able to back her when people weren't willing to listen to her, and it's like, she is honorable or whatever. That was cool. And how they were able to work together to try to send a distress call, and then the Klingon ship that was protecting the air tried to destroy the distress call, but they were ready for him and jumped over and took over the Klingon ship. Like, that was, and how that one Klingon guy just like ripped the captain apart, like, this is my ship. Of course, we don't know the answer yet, and obviously this should be answered in part 2 of what the Klingons' involvement, what is the purpose of transporting all these people to the planet, why were the Klingons protecting the planet, what is their involvement with Nicholas or Locarno and all that. But that's fine. We can leave that to part 2, and I can't make any judgments on that until that is answered in part 2. Yeah, so that was all very interesting. Of course, the big reveal that it was Nicholas Locarno who's behind it all, and Mariner knows him. So that sets up an interesting storyline for the finale. So let's get to the Freeman storyline. Now, this storyline was bothering me throughout most of the episode, but then the reveal they had at the end of the episode actually corrected it. It made me feel better about it. I was like, oh, okay, that actually makes perfect sense. Because throughout the episode, I was thinking, Freeman's being really stupid, and I don't like it. And I've said this in the past, I don't like it when they portray Freeman as stupid. I liked earlier episodes this season when they actually portrayed her as really smart. And as a good captain and not as an idiot. And here she seemed to be like an idiot where she would blatantly walk around in a Starfleet uniform, and these people obviously didn't like Starfleet, and she'd go and I did think it was funny that one of the funny parts of the episode was the how they had the thing that looked just like the thing from the Cobra Knight maneuver, which was a puppet. And she's like, "You're a puppet!" and starts shaking her, and it's like, and Rutherford looked at it. It's like, "I can clearly see internal organs. It's not a puppet." It was like, "What are you thinking? I'm a puppet?" That was a nice joke. That was a nice callback to the Cobra Knight maneuver. But anyway, yeah, so Freeman was constantly getting shot down, and to the point where she got laughed out of the bar, and where you see this badass like bounty hunter guy who like cruises past her and is able to instantly walk in and get what he wants, and they're like, "Why are you doing that to him? Oh no, he's working," and they make you think he's working for the bad guys. But then at the end they reveal it's really just Billups, and that this was Freeman's plan all along. And so when they revealed that, I was like, oh, okay, actually, no, this was really good. The whole time I was watching, I was thinking it was bad and it was stupid until they made that reveal, and I was like, oh no, Freeman's not an idiot. She actually is a smart, good captain, and this was part of her plan because she knew how they would react to Starfleet. And that's what I was thinking the whole time I was watching. I was like, doesn't she know how they would react to Starfleet? Why is they just blazingly walking in with their Starfleet uniforms? Of course they're going to get shot down. But she did know that, and that was actually part of the plan. And so that actually made me feel so much better about the entire storyline. I'm like, oh, and actually like it. And actually think, oh, this is actually a really good storyline. And I do like that reveal they had at the end. Of course, when they go to find Nicholas Locarno, of course they find schematics for the ship or whatever, so they find out that he was in fact the mastermind. Now, one thing I didn't talk about I do want to mention is the scene at the top of the episode we got where they were saying, the former Starfleet officers, that they need to go and look up and protect, and they mention 7 of 9, Beverly Crusher, Thomas Riker, and Nicholas Locarno. And I like how Boimler was like, "Oh, Beverly Crusher, we get to see," and he's all excited and like, no, that's the Vancouver's gonna get her. We're getting Nicholas Locarno. And they're like, "Who's that?" But yeah, 7 of 9. Again, looking up the timeline here. Well, I didn't really look it up, but I'm trying to think back to Picard season 1, because I believe, if I'm not too mistaken, 7 of 9 mentioned something about how when Voyager first returned, she did try to join Starfleet at first, but it didn't quite work out, and she ended up resigning or quitting or something. And I think, so that would imply, even though this is only like 2 years after Voyager got back, I think this would imply that, or is it 3 years? Oh, I haven't remembered the timeline. But anyway, it would imply that 7-9 had already joined and quit Starfleet by this time, because they refer to her as this former Starfleet officer as a civilian. And Beverly Crusher they call a civilian, and this is I think about 3 years after Nemesis, or 2 years after Nemesis, and it's implied that in Picard Season 3, that Beverly quit Starfleet to raise her son Jack Crusher and keep him hidden from Jean-Luc. And so this would be right around the time when Jack Crusher's a baby. So that would track too. Thomas Riker is a very, very interesting concept, though, because there's been a lot of fan fiction, or not fan fiction, but like B canon, like novels and video games and whatnot, to try to postulate what happened. I saw a lot of different theories of what happened to Thomas Riker. A lot of them involve like a jailbreak or something like that, because last we've seen he was in a Cardassian prison. But now this is the first official in canon explanation that definitively says Thomas Riker is not in prison anymore and that he's a civilian at large. But that's all we know. We don't know any of the other backstory, which I wish they gave us. But it is now official that Thomas Riker is at large and a civilian and not a criminal, not in prison. I think the most logical explanation would be that after the Dominion War, where Cardassia was basically a protectorate of the Federation and other powers like Klingon and Romulans, and they were helping them to rebuild, that since they were, the Empire, Cardassian Union itself collapsed, that they would simply release prisoners like Thomas Riker and release them to the Federation. And that's, so you could reason that's what happened, but could have been a jailbreak, you don't know. But anyway, I kind of wish they went after Thomas Riker, but of course they had to make Nicholas Locarno the enemy. And I did find it interesting when they brought up Nicholas Locarno. I did recognize his name right away as the, cadet from First Duty that Robert Duncan McNeil originally played before he played Tom Paris. And it was interesting because he was drummed out of Starfleet that he became a pilot for hire. That actually makes a lot of sense. And I do like that they had Robert Duncan McNeil. I'm like, as soon as they mentioned him, like, if they have this character show up, they need to have Robert Duncan McNeil voice him. It would be a shame if they don't. And they did. So, to their credit, that was great. And I can't wait to see how they portray him in part 2. So, I think overall this episode did its job correctly by getting me excited for part 2, even though it did have me scratching my head over canon a lot, but a lot of it does actually hold up. A lot of it does pass the sniff test. It's just the whole thing about Mariner being reckless since episode 6, which she definitively was not, is the only thing that I think fails the canon test. I'm not going to make the noise again. Anyway, that is it for my review. Oh, I didn't give my rating. So my rating for The Inner Fight, get it? And so Inner Light. Anyway, my rating for The Inner Fight out of 10, I think I'm going to go with an 8 for this episode. I don't think this episode was amazing. It didn't blow me away, but there were parts of it I really did like. As I said, I don't know, maybe should elevate this episode to a 9. I'm just not feeling that generous right now. Maybe after I see part 2, I might give it a 9. But right now, I was going to say an 8. Extremely good. I don't know, because part of me thinks it did move a bit too fast. It was a bit too fast-paced and just blew through the storyline. But I did like a lot of things it did in this episode, such as the Klingon guy making friends with Mariner and getting Mariner's backstory. And I ultimately liked the Freeman storyline, even though I thought I didn't like it, but the revelation, saved it and redeemed it and made it a really good storyline. And and we finally got an answer to what's been going on with this ship. Although part answer, we're still waiting for more answers that will come in the next part. But as I said, this episode did its job well in setting up, making me very interested to see what they do in part 2. So that is it for my review of Star Trek Lower Decks Season 4, Episode 9. I shall be back next week to cover the big finale, and then the week after I shall cover Season 4 as a whole. So be sure to check out my channel for that. Also, as I cover many other Star Trek videos going through Star Trek The Next Generation starting Season 2 soon, and also doing many other videos on Star Trek and many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.